The apartment's single bulb cast long, jagged shadows across the cluttered coffee table, where half-empty mugs of cooling tea stood like forgotten sentinels. The air hung heavy with stale chamomile and the faint, metallic tang of Lucas's aftershave, lingering like a ghost from earlier. She glanced up, heart thudding in uneven, labored bursts. Lucas lounged on the worn armchair across from her, his fingers drumming a slow, deliberate rhythm on the armrest. Tap, pause, tap, like he was counting secrets instead of seconds. Maya perched on the edge of the couch beside Evelyn, her knees drawn close, twisting a loose thread on her sweater into oblivion. The room felt smaller tonight, the walls pressing in with their faded wallpaper, peeling at the corners like old, shedding skin. "Evelyn?" Maya's voice cut through the silence, soft but insistent, her eyes wide with that familiar worry. "You've been staring at your phone for ages. Everything all right?" Evelyn forced a smile, slipping the device face down onto the table. The wood scratched against the glass, a tiny rasp that echoed too loudly in her ears. "Yeah, just spam. You know how it is." But the lie tasted bitter, coating her tongue like ash. She could still see the message burned into her mind, those words twisting like smoke. Betrayal. From who? Lucas and Maya, her anchors, the ones who'd pulled her through the wreckage of her last breakup, the late-night confessions over cheap wine. Yet lately, their stories never quite aligned. Lucas's vague excuses for canceling plans, Maya's hesitant pauses when Evelyn asked about their private talks. Lucas shifted, his gaze flicking to her phone before settling back on her face. "Spam, huh? Looks like it hit you hard." His tone was light, almost teasing, but there was an edge to it, a defensiveness coiled beneath the casual lean of his posture. He crossed his arms, the fabric of his shirt pulling tight across his shoulders, as if bracing for an unseen blow. Evelyn remembered how he'd always been the one to deflect, to steer conversations away from the raw edges, with a joke or a change of subject. But tonight, that deflection felt like a wall slamming down. Maya reached out, her hand brushing Evelyn's arm, warm, tentative. "We should talk about it, whatever it is. That's what we're here for, right? No secrets between us." Her words carried that passive plea, the one that begged for harmony without ever demanding the truth. Evelyn nodded, but the touch only amplified the knot in her stomach, a cold weight spreading through her chest. Secrets. The message mocked her now, invisible but insistent, whispering of fractures she hadn't wanted to see. The clock on the wall ticked onward, each second stretching into eternity. Evelyn's pulse synced with it, erratic and unrelenting. She wanted to confront them, to demand answers, but the fear gripped her tighter, the dread of isolation, of watching their faces harden into strangers. Instead, she picked up her mug, the porcelain cool against her palms, and sipped the tepid tea. It did nothing to wash away the unease, coiling deeper, a shadow lengthening in the corners of her trust. Lucas's drumming fingers paused, then resumed. Maya's thread snapped with a faint pop, and Evelyn wondered, for the first time, if the warmth of their circle had always been an illusion, brittle and ready to shatter. The message haunted her through the restless hours, its venom seeping into every shadowed corner of her thoughts. Sleep evaded her, replaced by a slow-building dread that coiled tighter with each unanswered pulse of her phone. By the dim light of morning, curiosity sharpened into suspicion, propelling her toward the one person who might unravel the lie, or deepen the fracture. She turned the key in the ignition, the engine's low growl mirroring the tension thrumming in her veins. "Why would I send something like that? It's insane, Evelyn. You're letting some prankster get under your skin." Lucas's voice sliced through the dim hum of the coffee shop, where the scent of overbrewed espresso clung to everything like a stale accusation. He leaned back in the booth, arms crossed tight over his chest, the leather of his jacket creaking faintly under the pressure. His eyes, usually quick with that easy charm, now darted to the table's edge, tracing the faint rings left by forgotten cups. Evelyn sat across from him, her fingers splayed flat on the cool formica surface, anchoring herself against the churn in her gut. The anonymous text burned in her mind, its words looping like a glitch. "They're lying to you, both of them." She'd shown it to him minutes ago, her phone thrust forward like evidence in a trial she hadn't signed up for. Maya fidgeted beside her, twisting a napkin into shreds, the paper whispering as it tore. Derek slouched at the end of the booth, his gaze fixed on Lucas with an intensity that bordered on hunger. "I didn't say it was you," Evelyn replied, her voice steady but laced with the edge of something sharper. She watched Lucas's face, searching for the tell, the flicker that had started haunting her lately, the way his smiles never quite reached his eyes anymore. "But someone did, and it's about us, about this." She gestured vaguely at the four of them, the invisible threads that had bound their nights of late confessions and shared secrets, now fraying under scrutiny. Maya cleared her throat, a soft, hesitant sound that barely cut the tension. "It's probably nothing. A wrong number, or, I don't know, some creep from online." Her words tumbled out too fast, her free hand smoothing the napkin remnants as if order could mend the rift. But Evelyn caught the way Maya's eyes slid away, avoiding Lucas's profile. Her usual warmth curdled into something evasive. Derek snorted, breaking his silence like a crack in ice. Or maybe it's someone who knows what's going on, someone tired of the bullshit. His tone carried a bitter undercurrent, resentment threading through each syllable. He leaned forward, elbows thudding against the table, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the edge. Jealousy simmered there, unspoken but palpable, the way he'd always orbited their closeness, never quite inside. Lucas shot him a glare, sharp and fleeting. "Watch it, Derek. Not everything's a conspiracy." Defensive walls rose in his posture, shoulders hunching just enough to signal retreat. He was protecting something, Evelyn could feel it. The way his secrets coiled tighter, manipulative barbs hidden beneath the facade of camaraderie. Her friendship with him had been the anchor, late-night talks that peeled back layers. But now those layers felt like masks, slipping. The steam from their untouched lattes curled upward, carrying the bitter tang of scorched milk that mirrored the doubt pooling in her chest. Evelyn's pulse throbbed in her ears, slow and insistent, amplifying the oppressive quiet that followed. Vague denials hung between them, unspoken accusations thickening the air. Why both of them? The question gnawed, suspicion rooting deeper, twisting the warmth of their bond into something cold and uncertain. Maya reached out, her touch light on Evelyn's arm, but it felt like a plea more than comfort. "We should just ignore it. Don't let this divide us." Passive, always smoothing edges, yet her avoidance only sharpened the fracture. Derek's eyes met Evelyn's, a silent challenge burning there, determined, unyielding. Lucas looked away, isolated in his silence, the group's unity splintering under the weight of what wasn't said. Evelyn exhaled, the dread settling like sediment, leaving her adrift in the ruins of trust. Evelyn shoved open the coffee shop door, the chill evening air wrapping around her like a shroud, carrying the weight of Lucas's dismissal. Her footsteps echoed hollow on the damp pavement, heart pounding with unresolved fury that curdled into creeping dread. As she passed a shadowed booth just beyond the threshold, muffled whispers slithered into her ears. Urgent, conspiratorial tones from two figures hunched together, their words dissolving into the oppressive gloom, fueling the insidious suspicion that deceit lurked closer than she dared imagine. "Did you see the way she looked at Lucas just now?" Derek's whisper cut through the coffee shop's low murmur, like a blade slipping from its sheath. His voice pitched low but edged with accusation. Evelyn froze mid-step, her hand still on the door's tarnished handle, the cool metal biting into her palm. She'd meant to slip out after that barbed exchange with Lucas, his denial hanging in the air like smoke she couldn't clear. But now, the words pinned her in place. Maya and Derek sat huddled at a corner table, half hidden by the slant of a potted fern, whose leaves drooped under invisible weight. The shop's air pressed thick, laced with the bitter tang of grounds and something sharper, like unspoken grudges fermenting. Maya shifted in her seat, her fingers twisting the edge of a napkin into ragged strips, the paper whispering under her touch. "Derek, please, it's nothing. She's just stressed. We all are." Her tone aimed for calm, but it frayed at the edges, passive as a sigh swallowed too quickly. She glanced toward the door, eyes darting, as if sensing the fracture widening beneath them all, keeping them together. That's what she wanted, what she always chased, even when it meant papering over the gaps with silence. Derek leaned closer, his chair scraping faintly against the scuffed floorboards, resentment coiling in the set of his shoulders. "Stressed? That's what you call it? Hiding messages? Lying about where she was that night? It's not stress, Maya. It's deception. And you're letting it slide because you can't stand a fight." His words dripped with the drive to unearth it all, no matter the cost, fueled by that buried jealousy gnawing at him, the way Evelyn and Maya had always shared secrets he could only circle from outside. Evelyn's breath caught, a shallow hitch in her chest. Betrayal. The word echoed from their whispers, twisting like a wire around her ribs. She pressed her back to the wall beside the door, the rough plaster scraping through her thin sweater, heart thudding in erratic pulses. Who were they talking about? Her? The group? The inconsistencies she'd brushed off, May's delayed texts, Derek's sidelong glances, now bloomed into something venomous. Suspicions she'd nursed alone suddenly validated in their hushed betrayal. Maya's voice dropped further, laced with that passive-aggressive undercurrent she wielded like a shield. "If you push this, Derek, you'll tear us apart. Is that what you want? To be the one who ends it?" Worry etched lines around her mouth, her fear of division manifesting in the way she averted her gaze, unwilling to confront the storm brewing. Derek scoffed, soft but cutting. "Better than pretending. Someone has to expose it before it swallows us whole." His determination burned through the resentment, a need to prove himself unyielding, not weak, not complicit in whatever shadow Evelyn's obsession with control had cast over them. Evelyn's fingers clenched, nails digging crescents into her palms. The shop's hum blurred into a distant roar, the scent of espresso turning cloying, suffocating. Alone. That's what gripped her now, the fear uncoiling cold and insistent in her gut. If they were whispering like this, turning on each other, what truths lay buried in their silences? She edged toward the exit, pulse racing, the door's bell tinkling like a warning as she slipped into the street. But the dread followed, a fracture splitting wider with every step. Evelyn released the door handle, the metallic chill lingering like a ghost on her skin as she stepped into the thickening dusk. Derek's words festered in her mind, a venomous whisper amplifying every sidelong glance she'd ever shared with Lucas. Sleep offered no refuge that night. Instead, a gnawing dread propelled her from bed, keys in hand, her pulse a slow, oppressive drum. By midnight, she shadowed their taillights down a fog-shrouded road, the weight of unspoken betrayals pressing heavier with each shadowed mile. Evelyn released the door handle and melted into the shadow of the alleyway, her boots scraping softly against the grit-strewn pavement. The coffee shop's chatter faded behind her like a dying echo, replaced by the distant hum of traffic that pressed in from all sides. She kept her distance, heart thudding an erratic rhythm against her ribs, as Derek and Lucas emerged ahead, their figures cutting through the thinning crowd on the narrow street. Derek walked with that purposeful stride she knew too well, shoulders hunched as if carrying an invisible weight, while Lucas lagged a step behind, glancing over his shoulder. Not at her, she prayed, but at the empty space they'd left. Evelyn's breath came shallow, each inhale tasting of exhaust and damp brick. Why had Derek's whisper lingered like poison? The way she looked at him. She? Who? The question clawed at her insides, fueling the steps that carried her forward, unseen. They turned into a side path, overgrown with ivy, that clawed at the crumbling walls of abandoned warehouses. The air thickened here, heavy with the metallic tang of rust and forgotten rain puddles. Evelyn pressed against a rusted dumpster, its cold edge biting through her jacket, and peered around the corner. The path narrowed to a dead-end alcove, lit only by the faint spill of a street lamp, where Derek stopped and faced Lucas. "You can't keep doing this," Derek said, his voice low, threaded with that resentment Evelyn had glimpsed in his eyes earlier. He stepped closer, too close, his hand rising to grip Lucas's arm, not in anger, but in something fiercer, more intimate. Lucas didn't pull away. Instead, he leaned in, his defensive posture cracking like thin ice, eyes shadowed with the isolation he wore like armor. Evelyn's pulse roared in her ears, drowning the world. She edged forward, silent as a ghost, her fingers curling into the rough ivy for balance. The leaves tore under her nails, sharp and real, grounding her against the nausea rising in her throat. Lucas's hand cupped Derek's jaw, thumb tracing the line of his cheekbone, with a tenderness that twisted like a knife. "I have to," he murmured, voice barely above a whisper, laced with that manipulative edge Evelyn had always sensed but never named. "For us. If she finds out—" Derek silenced him with a kiss, urgent and devouring, bodies pressing together in the dim light. Evelyn's world fractured. The alcove blurred, her vision tunneling to that point of contact, their closeness, the secrets woven into every shared breath. Betrayal bloomed cold and absolute in her chest, shattering the fragile trust she'd clung to. These were her friends, her anchors against the loneliness that terrified her most. Yet here they stood, entangled not just in deception, but in each other, excluding her, controlling the narrative of their trio with whispers and touches she was never meant to see. She stumbled back, a gasp escaping despite her clamped lips. The ivy snagged her sleeve, holding her in place for one agonizing second longer. Derek's jealousy, Lucas's isolation, they weren't shadows anymore. They were weapons, aimed at her heart. Evelyn wrenched free and fled into the gathering dusk, the weight of isolation crashing down, her mind already spinning with the dread of endless, sleepless nights, unraveling the truth she could no longer ignore. Hours blurred into a suffocating haze as Evelyn wandered the rain-slicked streets, the alley's shadows clinging to her like unspoken accusations. The fragments of conversation she'd overheard in the coffee shop gnawed at her core, twisting doubt into a festering wound. Desperation coiled tighter with each labored breath, the weight of isolation pressing down until rage ignited, a brittle spark in the oppressive dark. By midnight, in the dim glow of her apartment, the decision crystallized, inevitable and irreversible. The accusation tore through the dim-lit living room like a blade unsheathed too late, leaving gashes in the fragile quiet. Evelyn's voice cracked on the final syllable. Betrayed. And the word hung there, raw and irreversible, as Lucas's coffee mug slipped from his grip to the hardwood floor. Dark liquid pooled outward, staining the rug in irregular blooms that mirrored the chaos blooming in her chest. Maya flinched first, her knees drawing up on the sagging couch, as if to shield herself from the fallout. The room's stale air thickened with the scent of spilled brew and unwashed laundry from the hamper in the corner. Remnants of too many nights pretending everything was fine. Evelyn stood frozen in the doorway, her coat still damp from the alley's chill, the shadows from the street lamp outside slanting across her face like accusatory fingers. She'd followed Lucas here after the coffee shop, her footsteps silent on the cracked sidewalk, until she spotted Maya's silhouette through the window. The three of them gathered like conspirators around the low table, cluttered with half-empty takeout containers. "You think you can just whisper behind my back?" Evelyn's breath came in shallow bursts, each one fueling the fire she'd ignited without plan. Her hands clenched at her sides, nails biting into palms slick with sweat. The walls seemed to press closer, the faint tick of the wall clock amplifying her pulse into a relentless drum. She scanned their faces, Lucas's eyes narrowing behind the flicker of the single bulb overhead, Maya's lips parting in a silent plea. Lucas rose slowly, his chair scraping back with a deliberate grind that set her teeth on edge. "Evelyn, what the hell? You barge in here like this?" His voice was low, edged with that familiar defensiveness, but she caught the flicker in his gaze, the fear of exposure he buried so deep. He stepped over the spill, boots leaving faint prints in the mess, positioning himself between her and Maya, as if guarding a secret vault. Always the protector of his own shadows, manipulating the space to keep her at arm's length. Maya's hands twisted in her lap, fabric bunching under her fingers. "Ev, please, we just wanted to talk about you, about how you've been pulling away." Her words tumbled out, soft and evasive, laced with that passive worry that always smoothed over cracks instead of mending them. But Evelyn saw it now, the avoidance, the way Maya's eyes darted to Lucas for cues, binding them in a web she was never invited to. The dread coiled tighter in Evelyn's gut, a serpent twisting with every beat of her heart. Sleepless nights replayed in flashes, the anonymous texts, the hushed calls she'd overheard. Lucas's sudden distance like a door slamming shut. Betrayal wasn't a suspicion anymore. It was a certainty gnawing at her from within, her need for control fracturing under the weight. "Talk about me? Or plot how to cut me out? I saw you with Derek, Lucas. The lies, the glances. You're all in this together, aren't you?" Her voice rose, desperation cracking through the rage, tears stinging hot at the corners of her eyes. She wanted to claw back the trust, to force them to admit it, but the words only widened the rift. Lucas's face hardened, his jaw a rigid line she knew too well from arguments he'd twisted to his favor. "You're paranoid. This is destroying us." He reached out, but she recoiled, the motion sending a lamp wobbling on its side table. Maya whispered, "Don't do this, Ev. We can fix it." But her passivity rang hollow, fueling Evelyn's isolation like gasoline on embers. "No." The finality in Evelyn's tone severed the air between them, bonds snapping like brittle threads. She turned toward the door, the room's oppressive weight lifting only slightly as cool night air rushed in. Behind her, silence reigned, broken only by the drip of coffee into the growing stain, a testament to what she'd just drowned. Alone now, truly, the dread settled into her bones, a cold certainty that control was the illusion she'd chased all along. The echo of "betrayed" lingered like smoke in Evelyn's lungs, igniting a paranoia that twisted every glance into suspicion. In the oppressive hush that followed, the room's shadows seemed to thicken, pressing against her skin as unspoken doubts festered among the group. Time stretched taut, each heartbeat a slow unraveling, until the fragile bonds began to fray, leaving her adrift in a sea of fractured loyalties. The mug hit the floor with a dull crack, ceramic fracturing into jagged pieces that skittered across the hardwood like fleeing secrets. Lucas froze, his eyes locked on the spreading stain, but Derek's voice sliced through the stunned hush before anyone could move. "That's right. Look at the mess you've made, Lucas. Just like everything else." Maya flinched from her spot on the sagging couch, her fingers twisting the hem of her sweater into tight knots. The living room, already thick with the acrid bite of spilled coffee, felt smaller now, walls pressing in, as if the house itself resented the intrusion of truth. She glanced between them, her breath shallow, willing the fracture to seal itself. "Derek, please, not like this. We can talk." "Talk?" Derek's laugh barked out, sharp and hollow, echoing off the peeling wallpaper. He paced the narrow space in front of the fireplace, his shadow stretching long and distorted in the lamplight, devouring the rug's faded patterns. Every step ground paranoia deeper into his bones, the kind that whispered of hidden alliances, of glances exchanged when he wasn't looking. Lucas and Maya. They moved too seamlessly sometimes, their silences too comfortable. Was it jealousy twisting his gut, or the cold certainty that one of them had sold him out? He stopped, facing Lucas, whose face had hardened into a mask of feigned confusion. "You've been dodging this for weeks. The late nights, the whispers. I saw the messages on your phone last Tuesday. Don't even try to lie." Lucas's shoulders drew up, a subtle barricade, his gaze flicking to Maya for a split second too long. "Protect the facade," he told himself, the words a mantra against the dread pooling in his chest like the coffee at his feet. Exposure would unravel everything, the friendship he'd curated so carefully, thread by manipulative thread. "You're paranoid, Derek, twisting shadows into snakes. Those were work emails, nothing more." His voice stayed even, but inside, isolation clawed at him. The fear of losing this brittle circle sharpening like a blade against his skin. Maya's eyes welled, hot tears blurring the edges of the room. But she swallowed them back, her drive to mend warring with the passive urge to let it all slide away. Conflict terrified her, the way it splintered bonds she'd nurtured through quiet compromises. Yet here she was, her silence fueling the fire. "Derek, you're pushing too hard. We're friends, remember? This isn't us." Her words came out soft, edged with that passive-aggressive plea, begging without demanding, her hands unclenching only to hover uselessly in the air. Derek whirled on her, resentment flaring hot in his throat. Weak? Complicit? The accusation burned, jealousy coiling tighter around the group's old closeness, the way Lucas and Maya had always orbited each other, leaving him on the fringe. Friends? Friends don't cover for liars. I trusted you both, and now? His voice cracked, the determination fracturing into raw hurt, fists balling at his sides as the room spun with imagined betrayals. Every creak of the floorboards, every shift in their postures screamed conspiracy. Lucas stepped forward then, voice dropping low, manipulative calm weaving through the tension. "Enough. You're seeing ghosts, Derek. Walk it off." But the words only widened the rift, Maya's tears finally spilling as she turned away, shoulders shaking. The group teetered, then shattered. Derek storming toward the door without another word, the slam reverberating like a final verdict. Lucas stood alone amid the shards, facade cracking at the edges, while Maya curled into herself, the oppressive quiet swallowing them whole. Isolation settled over the remnants, heavy as unspoken dread, the paranoia lingering in the stale air long after the echoes faded. Hours dragged into a suffocating hush after the accusation hung in the air, the fragments of the mug mirroring the cracks in Lucas's resolve. He slipped away from the accusing stares, retreating through dim corridors to the shadowed sanctuary of his room, the door sealing him in oppressive solitude. The weight of their collective gaze lingered like a noose, tightening around his thoughts. In the encroaching dark, loneliness coiled deep, sanity unraveling as whispers of betrayal echoed. Could he trust anyone, even himself? They can't all be lying. Evelyn's mind clawed at the thought, sharp and insistent, as the shards of the mug still glinted under the kitchen light like accusations frozen in time. Lucas had bolted, his chair scraping back with a raw screech that echoed in her ears even now. But Derek's words lingered thicker, poisoning the air. "Look at the mess," he'd said, eyes boring into Lucas, but she felt them slide toward her next, probing for cracks. Maya hovered by the sink, her hands twisting a dish towel into knots, the fabric damp and clinging like skin after a fever. "We should just clean this up," she murmured, voice soft as frayed thread, her eyes darting between Derek and the door where Lucas had vanished. But Evelyn saw it, the flicker, the way Maya's gaze avoided hers, as if guarding something brittle. Keep us together. That's what Maya always did, patching over the splits with quiet pleas. But tonight, her passivity curdled into something sharper, a passive-aggressive edge that sliced without drawing blood. Derek paced, his boots thudding dully against the floorboards, each step a hammer blow to the fragile peace. "No, Maya. No more cleaning up his lies." His voice rasped, resentment coiling through it like smoke from a dying fire. He stopped, facing Evelyn directly, his face a mask of determination, etched with old jealousies, the way he'd always watched their easy closeness, the group he both craved and resented. "You knew, didn't you? About the money he siphoned. Evelyn, tell her. Tell her how he confessed to you last week, swore you to silence." The words landed like a blade between her ribs. Evelyn's breath caught, the room's stale warmth pressing in, heavy with the scent of spilled coffee and unspoken betrayals. She hadn't known, not fully, but the half-truth Derek spat now twisted her hesitation into complicity. Maya's towel slipped from her fingers, landing with a wet slap on the counter. "Evelyn?" Her tone wavered, worry fracturing into accusation, the drive to hold them all fracturing under the weight. But beneath it, Evelyn sensed the shadow. Maya's fear of division manifesting in this quiet push, forcing the fracture wider rather than mending it. He mentioned something, Evelyn admitted, her voice thin, anxiety flooding her veins like ice water. Suspicion bloomed in her chest, hot and obsessive, her need to control these bonds snapping taut. Betrayal, from Lucas, from Derek's relentless exposure that left no room for her secrets. She turned to Maya, searching for alliance, but found only Evelyn's own reflection in the other's wide eyes. Anxious, mirroring her own dread of isolation. It wasn't like that. He said it was alone, nothing more. Derek laughed, a bitter bark that echoed off the walls. Alone. And you believed him? You're all so desperate to pretend we're family. His jealousy flared, raw and unmasked, driving him to shatter the facade entirely. The lie, innocuous on the surface, Lucas's whispered confidence to her alone, crumbled now, exposing the rot. Not just his theft, but the web of silences they'd all spun to avoid the truth. Maya stepped back, her passivity crumbling into a whisper. "We trusted you." The words hung, a final unraveling. Evelyn fled then, the kitchen's clamor fading as she slipped into the hallway, the door clicking shut behind her like a verdict. Alone in the darkened study, shadows pooling thick around the desk where forgotten papers rustled faintly in the draft from a cracked window. She sank into the chair, the leather creaking under her, cold against her skin. The silence pressed in, oppressive and vast, amplifying the thud of her pulse. Were they all against her now? Derek's resentment, Maya's quiet withdrawal. Had the loyalty ever been real, or just another layer of control she clung to? Her fingers traced the edge of a book, the texture rough and unyielding, but it offered no answers. Only the gnawing void, loneliness coiling deep, whispering that she was the betrayer, the one left adrift in the dark. Sanity frayed at the edges. Perhaps she'd imagined the trust all along. As twilight bled into night, Evelyn lingered in the dim kitchen, the shattered mug's edges catching faint glimmers like fractured truth she couldn't reassemble. Doubt coiled tighter, unraveling into a yawning void that pressed against her chest. Each breath labored under the weight of betrayal's shadow. The house groaned in oppressive silence, walls closing in, as hopelessness seeped through her bones, slow and inexorable. Then, in the heavy dark, her phone hummed, a summons she knew would drag her deeper into the abyss. That's when she realized the lie hadn't been Lucas's alone. It snaked back to all of them, binding their secrets into a noose she couldn't slip. Evelyn's phone buzzed once against the scarred wooden table, the vibration cutting through the dim hum of the apartment's radiator. Night had settled thick outside the window, streetlights carving harsh angles across the blinds, but inside, the glow from the screen pulled her gaze like a hook. She snatched it up, thumbs smudging the cracked glass as the message loaded. They knew about the accident, all of them. Check the basement files. It's bigger than your friend. It's the firm. Run if you can. Her pulse thudded low in her throat, each beat dragging heavier than the last. The words blurred for a second, then sharpened into accusations. The accident, 3 years buried, the one she'd confessed to Lucas in a haze of wine and whispers, trusting his nod, his hand on her shoulder. But this? The firm? Derek's law office, where Evelyn had filed papers as a favor, where Lucas consulted on cases that always ended in vague warnings. Her fingers hovered over the reply button, but who would she even ask? The sender was anonymous again, same blocked number as the first tip-off that had unraveled the mug-smashing fight hours ago. Footsteps scraped from the hall, Derek, returning from his pacing circuit around the block, his keys jangling like a chain. He paused in the doorway, eyes narrowing at her hunched form. Still staring at that thing? Evelyn, we need to talk about Lucas. He didn't just run. He lied about the money, the transfers. Shut up, she snapped, voice fraying at the edges. She shoved the phone toward him, the screen's light etching shadows under his cheekbones. Read it. The accident. You knew? Derek's face went still, a mask cracking at the corners. He took the phone, scrolling slowly, his breath hissing out in a thin stream. Resentment flickered in his eyes, not at her, but at the exposure, the way it stripped his determination bare. This is bullshit. Lucas must have leaked it, playing both sides to keep you hooked. But his voice wavered, betraying the jealousy that had always simmered. Watching her lean on Lucas during late-night confessions. He wanted the truth out, yes, but not if it left him the weak link, complicit in whatever web they'd spun. The door rattled then, a frantic knock echoing through the thin walls. Lucas. Evelyn's stomach twisted as she crossed the room, her bare feet cold against the peeling linoleum. She yanked it open, and there he stood, disheveled in the hallway's fluorescent glare, coat askew, eyes darting past her to Derek. "Evelyn, listen, I came back because—" "You lied," she cut in, her suspicion coiling tighter, feeding that obsessive grip she kept on their fraying bonds. Alone. The trade. The word looped in her mind, a chant against the dread pooling in her chest. The accident, the firm, it's all connected, isn't it? You, Derek, everyone. Lucas's shoulders sagged, his defensive posture crumbling under the weight of her stare. He stepped inside, the door clicking shut like a trap springing. "It's not what you think. I was protecting you. From them, from what the partners buried." But his words rang hollow, laced with that manipulative edge, the way he always twisted proximity into control, fearing the loss of her as his anchor. Derek thrust the phone back at him, voice low and venomous. "Protecting? Or covering your ass in their conspiracy?" The room closed in, the radiator's drone swelling to a roar in Evelyn's ears. Lies layered upon lies, each revelation peeling back not trust, but the illusion of it. She sank onto the edge of the couch, the springs creaking under her, as their voices blurred into a tense murmur, accusations flying, defenses fracturing. The message burned in her pocket now, a weight dragging her toward answers she dreaded. What files? What accident had they all touched? Hopelessness seeped in, cold and absolute, as the three of them circled each other in the dim light, facades shattering into shards that cut deeper than any truth could heal. No escape from this. Not from them. Not from the rot eating through everything she thought solid. 3 days blurred into a suffocating haze, the apartment's walls closing in like the secrets Evelyn now carried. Sleep evaded her, each night replaying the noose of lies tightening around her throat. The radiator's hum, a relentless echo of isolation. Paranoia seeped into every corner, turning trusted faces into phantoms. Then, as dusk bled through the grimy curtains, her phone stirred again. Not with a simple buzz, but a murmur of encrypted dread, pulling her deeper into the web. The faint chime of the apartment buzzer jolted her. Lucas's voice from 3 summers ago, laughing as he pressed a daisy into her palm, promising they'd always unravel secrets together. Evelyn's grip tightened on the doorknob, the metal cool and unyielding against her sweating palm. 3 days had clawed by since that buzz on her phone, each hour twisting the knot in her chest tighter. She hadn't slept, not really, just fragments of accusations looping in the dark. Now, here they were, summoned to her cramped living room under the guise of clearing the air. The radiator hissed faintly, a mechanical whisper underscoring the silence as she stepped back, letting Lucas and Maya file in. Lucas moved first, shedding his coat with deliberate slowness, his eyes flicking to hers, searching, she supposed, for the old trust. But his shoulders carried that anxious hunch, the one he got when lies piled too high. "Ev, we need to talk this out," he said, voice low, as if volume alone could contain the fracture. He sank into the sagging armchair, fingers interlacing like a barrier. Maya hovered by the kitchen counter, arms crossed, her assertive posture cracking at the edges with anxious breaths. She wanted unity, Evelyn knew that much, but the passive glint in her eyes screamed avoidance, a shadow Evelyn had ignored for too long. Evelyn didn't sit. She paced the threadbare rug, the fibers snagging her socks like tiny accusations. Her drive pulsed. Confront the betrayal, reclaim some shred of reconciliation, before the aloneness swallowed her whole. But control slipped. Her voice came out sharper than intended. That message on my phone, it wasn't just some glitch, was it? You both knew. About the money, the favors, the way it all looped back to us. The words hung, probing. She'd pieced it from fragments. Lucas's hidden loans to Maya, Maya's unspoken favors to cover his tracks, and Evelyn, the blind thread holding their trio. An innocuous lie about a forgotten debt, now blooming into deceit. Lucas shifted, his torn expression fracturing. It's not what you think. I was protecting us, all of us. His manipulative edge surfaced, words weaving to safeguard the bonds he feared losing. But exposure loomed, sweat beaded on his brow, and he leaned forward, anxious plea in his tone. If I told you everything then, it would have torn us apart. Maya interjected, assertive fire masking her fear of division. Stop dancing around it, Lucas. Evelyn deserves the truth. Yet her voice wavered, passive aggression seeping through, blaming him to sidestep her own complicity. She stepped closer, eyes pleading for unity even as conflict festered. We were scared. The scheme, it started small, to help each other. But it grew. Evelyn's laugh was brittle, dread coiling deeper. The facade cracked wide, trust's mask shattering under the weight of their shadows. Her obsessive need clawed up. She wanted to seize the reins, force reconciliation, but betrayal's chill left her conflicted, adrift. You let it bind us like a noose. How do I even start forgiving that? Before Lucas could respond, her phone vibrated on the coffee table, sharp, insistent. She snatched it up, screen glowing with an unknown number. They all knew. Watch the strings pull tighter. Your friend's secrets aren't done unraveling. Another followed. Ask Maya about the night in the warehouse. Lucas's hands weren't clean. The room stilled. Evelyn's breath caught, unease flooding her veins like ice water. Lucas paled, mouth opening soundlessly. Maya's eyes darted, assertive mask slipping into raw anxiety. The messages hinted at layers Evelyn hadn't touched. A larger scheme. Friends no longer allies, but suspects in the gloom. Dread settled, oppressive and slow, as the radiator's hum mocked their fractured silence. Those 3 days stretched into an endless vigil, suspicion coiling tighter around Evelyn's thoughts like rusted wire. The memory of Lucas's promise curdled into betrayal, every creak in the apartment feeding the dread that their shared secrets masked something darker. Unable to bear the paralysis any longer, she seized her coat and keys, the weight of unresolved whispers propelling her into the oppressive night. Toward the forsaken mill on the outskirts, where shadows of their old circle and unseen puppeteers were said to converge. The faint metallic tang of rust invaded Evelyn's nostrils as she pushed open the warped door of the old textile mill, its hinges groaning like a stifled confession. Dust motes swirled in the slanted beam of her flashlight, clinging to the air like unspoken accusations. 3 days of silence from her phone had driven her here, to this crumbling relic on the city's edge, whispered about in late-night forums as a haunt for those who traded secrets in the shadows. Her friends, Lucas, Maya, Derek, had always dismissed the rumors, but the knot in her gut twisted harder now, suspicion coiling like the frayed wires dangling from the ceiling. She moved deeper, footsteps muffled on the grit-strewn concrete, each one a deliberate press against the dread urging her to turn back. The building's oppressive weight bore down, exposed beams sagging under decades of neglect, walls etched with faded graffiti that blurred into indecipherable warnings. Her pulse thrummed in her ears, a slow rhythm syncing with the distant drip of water somewhere in the labyrinth of corridors. Why here? Why them? The betrayal she'd glimpsed in fragments, stolen texts, evasive glances, had festered, pushing her to reclaim some fragment of truth. A murmur drifted from around the corner, low and urgent, pulling her into the shadows of a vast, empty loom room. She crouched behind a rusted machine, its cold iron biting into her palms, and peered through the gaps. There they were, Lucas, Maya, Derek, huddled under a single hanging bulb that cast their faces in stark, unforgiving light. Lucas paced, his usual easy charm fractured, hands gesturing sharply as if warding off invisible threats. "We can't keep this up," he said, voice tight, laced with that anxious edge Evelyn knew too well from their shared summers. Evelyn's starting to ask questions. "If she digs deeper—" He trailed off, glancing at Maya with a look that twisted something deep in Evelyn's chest. Intimate, protective, nothing like the platonic bond she'd assumed. Maya crossed her arms, her assertive posture masking the flicker of anxiety in her eyes. "Then we tell her the truth, for once. Hiding it is tearing us apart." But her words carried a passive undercurrent, a shadow of avoidance, as if confrontation were a blade she'd rather blunt. She reached for Derek's arm, a subtle squeeze that spoke of alliances Evelyn had never suspected. Derek pulled away slightly, frustration etching lines across his brow. "Truth? Which part? That we've been meeting here for months, plotting how to phase her out without a scene?" His voice cracked, conflicted, jealousy simmering beneath the words like acid. He shot Lucas a glare, the group's unspoken tensions bubbling up. "You're the one who started this, manipulating the narrative to keep your precious secrets safe. Afraid of losing your closest friendship? Please." Evelyn's breath caught, the air thickening around her like a noose. Hidden lives, Lucas and Maya's stolen nights, Derek's complicit rage, a conspiracy woven from envy and deceit. The daisy from 3 summers ago wilted in her memory, its promise poisoned. Disbelief crashed over her first, a numb wave, then anger ignited, hot and unyielding, urging her to burst in and shatter the fragile unity they clung to. But she held back, suspicion rooting her in place, the slow burn of revelation etching dread into her bones. They thought themselves hidden, but the shadows held her now, witness to the unraveling of everything she held dear. Her footsteps echoed hollowly on the decrepit floorboards, each creak amplifying the mill's suffocating silence, as if the building itself conspired to trap her breaths. The flashlight's beam trembled in her grip, carving erratic paths through the gloom, where cobwebs draped like veils over forgotten sins. A chill seeped into her bones, dread coiling tighter with every shadowed corner, pulling her deeper into the oppressive heart of the ruin, toward something concealed, waiting to unravel her world. The echo of voices that should have trailed behind Evelyn into the mill. She paused amid the skeletal looms, flashlight beams slicing through the gloom like a hesitant blade. No footsteps from Maya or Derek, no murmured reassurances from the group that had sworn to stick together. Just the oppressive hush of abandonment, broken only by the faint drip of water somewhere unseen. Evelyn's pulse thudded in her ears, a solitary rhythm against the void. She had urged them to follow, her voice assertive, despite the knot of anxiety twisting in her gut. "Unity," she had said. "Face this forsaken place as one." But now, the silence mocked her plea. A loose panel in the far wall caught her light, its edges splintered and unremarkable. She approached, fingers brushing the rough wood, half expecting the others to burst in with apologies. Instead, the panel gave way with a dry rasp, revealing a narrow alcove. No, a room, concealed behind false plaster. Evelyn's breath caught. She stepped inside, the beam trembling slightly as it swept over shelves sagging under yellowed stacks of paper. Photographs pinned haphazardly to the walls, like trophies of some twisted hunt. Her drive for reconciliation faltered as she lifted the first document, its edges curling like dying leaves. Notes in Derek's precise script, timelines of her daily routines, sketched maps of her apartment, circled dates marking moments of vulnerability. Her therapy sessions, the nights she confessed fears of isolation to the group. Manipulation, it spelled out in cold ink. Plans to steer conversations, to exploit her trust, all under the guise of friendship. Evelyn's chest tightened, a surge of disbelief crashing against the walls of her mind. This couldn't be. Not from them. Footsteps finally, real ones, scraped from the main chamber. Maya entered first, her face pale in the flashlight's glow, assertive posture cracking at the edges with anxiety. "Evelyn? We got separated in the dust. What's this? Her eyes darted to the papers, but she didn't move closer, as if confrontation might shatter the fragile unity she craved. Derek followed, his expression a mask of frustration, conflicted shadows playing across his features. "Let me see," he said, voice steady but laced with that underlying edge, the jealousy he buried toward their intertwined lives now bubbling up. He snatched a photograph from the wall, a candid shot of Evelyn asleep on Maya's couch, the two of them whispering in the background, bodies too close, secrets etched in their smiles. Hidden lives, laid bare. Derek's plan, his notes on fostering division to pull Maya away, to claim her without Evelyn's obsessive grip interfering. Evelyn's hands clenched the document, anger igniting beneath the dread. "You both. This whole time?" Her voice cracked, determined yet fracturing, the fear of betrayal coiling like smoke in her lungs. Alone, betrayed by the very one she sought to bind closer. Maya's shadow emerged in her hesitation, passive-aggressive denial forming on her lips. "It's not what it looks like. We were protecting the group." "Protecting?" Derek cut in, his drive to balance truth warring with complicity. Fear of weakness making his tone sharp. "Evelyn, listen. It was for the best. Your control. It's suffocating." The room pressed in, the air thick with the scent of aged paper and rust. Documents whispering of strings pulled behind her back. Evelyn backed against the shelf, photographs fluttering down like accusations. Fear rooted her in place, not of the mill's decay, but of the unraveling bonds, the profound isolation dawning as the light from her flashlight dimmed, battery faltering in the oppressive dark. Disbelief twisted into rage, slow and searing, but beneath it, the terror of what came next. A world stripped of trust, echoing with absences that would never fill. Evelyn's heart hammered in the suffocating silence of the mill, the absent echoes twisting into a knot of betrayal's first whisper. Hours blurred into a haze of frantic searching, shadows clinging like accusations as fragments of the group's fractured trust began to align in her mind. Mayer's evasion, Derek's lingering glances. Dread coiled tighter, fueling a slow-rising anger that sharpened her resolve. Just as the pieces threatened to form a damning picture, a figure emerged from the gloom. The flashlight's beam cut a sterile white path through the mill's dust-choked air. Evelyn's heartbeat thundered in her ears, a frantic drum drowning the distant drip. She swung the light toward the shadowed entrance, where the group's absence clawed at her. Maya, Derek. They'd promised no splits, no wandering off into this rotting carcass of industry. But the beam caught only rusted beams and cobweb veils, mocking her with their stillness. Her mind raced, stitching fragments. The whispered arguments back at the cabin, Lucas's evasive glances during the drive here, Derek's sudden silences. Betrayal simmered beneath it all, a poison she'd ignored for the sake of their fragile circle. Footsteps scraped from the gloom, deliberate, unhurried. Evelyn froze, beam jerking upward to frame Lucas's face, pale and etched with strain. He stepped into the light, hands raised like a supplicant, but his eyes darted, calculating. Behind him, Derek lingered at the threshold, his silhouette hunched, fists clenched at his sides. "Evelyn," Lucas started, voice low, threading the silence like a needle. "We need to talk. Now." She backed against a loom's jagged frame, the metal biting into her spine. "Where's Maya? You left me here. All of you." Derek pushed forward, his breath ragged. "It wasn't like that. We had to." Frustration cracked his words, his gaze flicking to Lucas, pleading for backup. He wanted to shield them, she saw it, the group's brittle peace. But the weight of secrets twisted his features, jealousy flickering in the shadows of his eyes. Lucas ignored him, advancing. "Listen, this place, the mill, it's not just some abandoned ruin. They made me do it. The ones pulling strings from the outside." His words tumbled out, laced with anxiety, each one a hook snagging her doubt. "Coerced me into feeding them intel on you, on all of us. Said they'd ruin everything if I didn't. My family, my work. But it's bigger, darker. They're watching Evelyn, using us like pieces. Her pulse spiked, the beam trembling in her grip. Not from fear, but a rising heat in her chest. Pieces. That's what they'd become. You? The word escaped as a hiss. You sold us out? For what? Your precious control over the lies? Lucas flinched, torn, his manipulative edge sharpening as he reached for her arm. I was protecting us. You don't get it. Protecting? Evelyn shoved him back, the flashlight clattering to the floor, beams spinning wild across their faces. Light fractured on Derek's conflicted stare, on Lucas's anxious flinch. Anger surged, hot and unyielding, erasing the dread's cold grip. You and your safeguards, hiding your little secrets while I trusted you, both of you. She rounded on Derek, who stood frozen, his jealousy now a raw undercurrent, fueling her rage. And you knew? Stayed silent to keep your spot in this twisted family? Derek's voice broke, frustrated. I didn't want to shatter it. We could have fixed. Fixed? She laughed, bitter, the sound echoing off the skeletal machines. The air thickened with their shared guilt, oppressive as the mill's decay. Lucas's coercion, Derek's complicity, it all unraveled now, hidden lives spilling like oil, stolen nights, whispered pacts, her isolation their collateral. Reconciliation? A joke. She was alone, betrayed by the very hands she'd clasped. Lucas edged closer, desperate to salvage. Evelyn, please. There's more. They're coming. Get out. Her voice sliced the tension, anger ablaze now, propelling her toward the exit. The drip resumed, indifferent, as the group's fractures widened into chasms. The oppressive gloom of the mill thickened around Evelyn, its rusted ribs closing in like a betrayal made manifest. Maya's laughter, Derek's assurances, they dissolved into the void, leaving her pulse a solitary dirge amid the decay. Cornered by shadows that whispered of deeper deceptions, dread seeped into her bones, twisting isolation into a desperate certainty. The evidence weighed heavy in her pocket, a fragile tether to truths now poisoned. To sever it might shield them all, or so her fracturing mind insisted. The abandoned mill's heart. Midnight. Where rusted beams groaned under forgotten weight, Evelyn's flashlight beam jittered across the chamber, catching flecks of rust like dried blood on the floor. Her breath came in shallow pulls, the air thick with the metallic tang of decay and something sharper, betrayal's aftertaste. She hadn't meant to separate, but the shadows had pulled her deeper, away from the faint echoes of voices that now twisted into accusations in her mind. Maya and Lucas. They were supposed to stay together. Always. Footsteps scraped from the corridor, deliberate and uneven. Evelyn whipped the light around. Maya emerged first, her face a mask of smeared dirt and wide eyes, clutching a splintered plank like a shield. Behind her, Lucas loomed, his silhouette fractured by the beam, hands buried deep in his jacket pockets. Evelyn, Maya said, voice cracking on the edges. We thought you'd fallen through. The floor. It's unstable here. She stepped closer, assertive in her worry, but her gaze darted to Lucas, a flicker of something unspoken. Lucas didn't meet Evelyn's eyes. We called for you. Twice. His tone was measured, too smooth, the kind that always smoothed over cracks before they widened. The beam trembled in Evelyn's grip. She swept it over the alcove behind them, where a battered metal box lay pried open on a crate. Papers spilled out, faded letters, photos, a ledger stained with ink that looked too fresh. Evidence of Lucas's secrets, the ones he'd buried here years ago, ties to deals that could unravel everything. Their friendship. The lies he'd told to keep them close, manipulating distances when truths threatened to pull them apart. You knew about this place, Evelyn whispered, the words building like pressure in her chest. Her drive surged, determined to face the fear clawing at her. Alone, betrayed, controlled by ghosts of trust. All this time, you brought us here to, what, hide it again? Maya's plank lowered slightly. Evelyn, wait. We found it together. Lucas said it was nothing, but… Her assertiveness faltered, anxiety bleeding through as she glanced between them, desperate for unity. Yet her body angled away, passive-aggressive in its retreat, avoiding the storm she sensed brewing. Lucas exhaled sharply, stepping forward. It's not what you think. I was protecting us. All of us. His voice tore, anxious now, the mask slipping. He reached for the box, fingers brushing the papers. Proof of his manipulations, the letters confessing how he'd sown doubts between them to keep Evelyn near, to safeguard his place without honesty. Betrayal ignited in Evelyn's core, hot and irreversible. She lunged, snatching a fistful of the documents, her shadow self demanding control. Lies, all of it. The papers crumpled in her hands, and in a surge of conflicted fury, reconciliation shattered. She tore them, flames from her lighter catching the edges. The fire bloomed, small but vicious, consuming the evidence she thought would shield them from exposure, protect the remnants of what they had. But as the ashes scattered, a single photo fluttered free, unburnt, landing face up at Maya's feet. Lucas frozen, staring. It showed him with another face, one Evelyn recognized, a rival from their past, the betrayal's deeper root, now glaring up like an accusation left behind. Maya knelt, picking it up slowly. Her eyes met Evelyn's, the unity she'd craved, fracturing into suspicion. What have you done? Evelyn's hand went slack, the flashlight clattering to the floor. The beam spun wild, casting their shadows long and accusatory across the walls. Trust dissolved, leaving only the oppressive echo of what they'd lost. As Evelyn fled the mill's suffocating embrace, the metallic tang clung to her skin like a curse. Hours bled into days of fractured isolation, her thoughts a slow, unraveling spiral of doubt and dread. The betrayal she'd tasted festered, poisoning every shadow, until the inevitable fracture loomed. A gathering of familiar faces, their stares heavy with judgment, poised to shatter her world in accusation and despair. 3 weeks of fractured echoes had eroded the fragile truce, pulling them back to the mill's shadow under the guise of resolution. Lucas's boots scraped against the cracked concrete as he entered the dim-lit bar on the outskirts of town, the same one they'd claimed as neutral ground after the mill's revelations. Neon signs buzzed overhead, casting erratic pulses of red across scarred wooden tables, where empty glasses collected rings of condensation like accusations. The air reeked of stale beer and cigarette ghosts, clinging to his skin as he spotted Maya and Derek in the corner booth, their postures rigid, faces half-veiled in shadow. He slid in opposite them, heart thudding a staccato against his ribs. "We need to talk, properly this time." His voice came out steadier than he felt, but the words tasted like ash. His drive to salvage what remained, clashing with the anxiety gnawing at his edges. Maya leaned forward first, her eyes sharp, assertive lines etching her brow. She'd always pushed for directness, but tonight it carried an edge of fracture, her fear of division fueling the confrontation she'd delayed too long. "Talk? You mean explain why you've been spinning stories that drag us all into your mess?" Her fingers drummed the table once, a restrained rhythm betraying the passive-aggressive undercurrent she'd hidden for weeks. That night at the mill, Evelyn's disappearance, the whispers you swore you heard. It wasn't real, Lucas. You're seeing threats where there are none. Derek shifted beside her, his frustration boiling over in the set of his shoulders, conflicted gaze flicking between them. He wanted balance, truth without shattering the group. But jealousy twisted in him like a thorn, their old closeness now a barrier he couldn't breach. "She's right. We've covered for you, played along with your episodes. But it's gone too far. The cops questioned us today because of your anonymous tip. You triggered this chain. Paranoia feeding lies. And now we're all suspects in whatever delusion you've built." Lucas's breath caught, the room tilting as their words landed like blows. He'd meant to protect them, to shield the friendship from his own unraveling truths, but manipulation,